Morning all. There's another fascinating encounter between Vishy Anand and Magnus Carlsen in the Amber Blindfold tournament of 2009. Now you might wonder how this works. Actually, both players in the Blindfold format of Amber are looking at computer screens, able to submit their moves, but no pieces are shown on the boards. So I think they're able to submit their move and basically test the legality of the move. And that's storing the moves for the opponent to know it's their turn, etc. So, playing white, Vishy Anand, who was 2791 at the time, and Magnus was 2776 at the time. So e4, and Magnus replies with the Sicilian defence. I don't know about you, but actually, after about 10 or 15 moves, I sometimes I just can't keep track of the pieces. And also, I've heard, well, basically, that it can cause a lot of mental strain. I think Kasparov was not a great fan of blindfold chess, with slight concerns about mental strain. But some people seem to view it as a good training method. So anyway, knight F3, knight C6, bishop B5 from Vishy. Okay, very popular as an anti-Sveshnikov system to play bishop B5. Magnus just responds D6 here. White castles. Now bishop D7, avoiding any structural damage potentially if black can now recapture on C6 with the bishop. Rook E1, as though a kind of Royal-Pesian type strategy is going to be adopted, trying to get space in the centre. Knight F6 and now C3. Okay, so Magnus plays A6 and the bishop just returns here to F1. It doesn't bother going through this route like a Royal-Pes. Bishop G4 and now D3 is played. E6 from Magnus, as though he doesn't mind this kind of French defence structure. Maybe D5 with the bishop outside of the pawn chain. It's a French defence style structure potentially without the banned bishop, in inverted commas. The banned bishop on G4 now is usefully pinning. So knight Bd2, bishop E7. After H3, bishop H5. Perhaps a slightly surprising move. Looks a bit controversial, this next move. Which he plays G4. Which does weaken... pardon me. Choking on coffee. Which does weaken his king side a little bit to play G4. But how is this actually going to be exploited? Well, after bishop G6, black has a natural leverage move H5 to try and wrench open the H file. But you might think, well, surely white can keep the lines closed with a later G5. So that's the kind of introductory mechanics here going on. In the meantime, also, if black is allowed H5, then the bishop can also retreat. Here, Vishy seizes the opportunity to grab the light square bishop with knight H4. Well, the option anyway to grab the light square bishop. And we see knight D7. And actually it's not taken here. The knight actually decides to go to G2. So actually maybe that's the real intention, is just this rerouting to allow F4, F5 and just squash the bishop instead with a space gain like that of F4, F5. Magnus reacts with H5. And white now plays F4, so he's ready actually now to play either F5 or G5 to keep the lines shut. Maybe that's also attractive. Magnus takes the opportunity at least to open up the H file. And now plays Queen C7, preparing the possibility of casting queenside, which seems very, very logically justified here, given white's king is over here with these kind of vacuumous, potentially vacuumous weaknesses. Okay, so in this position, knight F3 is played, and Magnus does indeed castle queenside. So a very exciting blindfold game, and credit to both players for keeping track of things so well. Knight E3, knight B6 is played by Magnus. Okay, and Vishy now plays knight C4, not minding his pawns being doubled here. It would provide a kind of bind against D5 potentially. Okay, after knight takes C4, D takes C4, there is frontal pressure and there's kind of bind, as though this might be interesting for white with F5 on the cards. But there's a kind of aggressive move now played by Magnus, f5. Okay, what does f5 do? It fixes this bishop positionally. This bishop is now locked in by that f4 pawn. Provides a blockade against white playing f5. Any downsides? Well, e takes f5, opens up the rook, and maybe d5 looks a little bit weaker temporarily. And now g5 seems to shut down the lines as well, so as though white's king is safe. But things get very interesting now. Bishop f7 implies two things. A, g6 is possible, and also d5, this central d5 of the rook staring at the queen here. d5 looks like an unpleasant possibility, and black is going to be using this soon. But first, after queen c2, f5 is now attacked. That's protected, and there's no real way of stopping d5. It's really liberating black's position a lot. So Vishy plays queen f2, at least trying to target c5 in response. A slight downside might be the c5 pawn. So d5, first taking on d5, and now Vishy plays bishop e3, not really suspecting anything is up in this position. Can you guess what Magnus plays here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, Magnus plays the astonishing, especially given its blindfold, bishop takes g5. How many of us would see it in a normal game, let alone blindfold? If knight takes g5, then rook h1 appears to be mate. If fg, then that line has been opened up here, and it would seem, for example, bishop takes f3 is very dangerous, for example, like this. So this doesn't look too hot to take that bishop. So queen g3 is played, but now Magnus has got leverage. With that g-pawn knocked out from white, he just simply retreats the bishop, and now he can just try and wrench open that g-file very aggressively. It seems a bit token to try and kick this bishop. It can just go here and just weaken d4, just make things worse. So bishop g2 is played, and then we see g5 again. Knight takes g5, trying to keep things closed. It's taken, and now of course queen takes g5 is facing the full RAF on the g-file. So white plays bishop takes d5 here. After rook takes d5, that does seem as though queen g5 might be technically possible. Well, in fact, it is better than fg, because fg there's queen takes g3 check in any case. Okay, which wouldn't be too hot. So queen takes g5 is only move, it seems now. Queen f7, creating the threat of rook g8, skewing the queen. Vishy probably detects he's lost now. He plays king f2 anyway, allowing a very powerful rook on the 7th with check, king f1. And now we see rook d8, which not only introduces threats of rook g8 or maybe rook h8, but also queen c4 check. And in fact, after queen g3 we see queen c4 check, and now we just see rook takes b2, so the king can't munch the rook, and now rook g8 is a major threat. Here Vishy had enough. It was quite an impressive game, and to be honest, both players need to be applauded for being able to track the pieces, if nothing else, to play so deep into a game and be able to track the pieces. But Magnus especially for the tactical skill he demonstrated. Let's quickly give this a second going over with our engine assistance. So when was black actually technically better? This was okay for white so far. g4 is actually mentioned by the engine as a move here. Knight h4. Now knight takes g6 was actually preferred by the engine in this position, just getting that light square bishop off. It did prove very dangerous later on this diagonal. So in this position, this might be an alternative way of playing it. White should be okay. It looks a lot safer than the game anyway. The game looked like a nightmare for white, the way things panned out after knight g2. So black actually technically looks better according to an engine here anyway. H5 looks like the more human move, trying to wrench open the lines. H6 probably has some positional points, trying to play bishop G5 and get rid of this guy at some point. Or just bishop H7 then G5. Maybe there's some other subtle ideas going on with H6. But anyway, H5 looks entirely logical from a human point of view. F4, and it looks like, you know, both sides logically trying to open or shut down lines here. Black logically castling queenside, so that both rooks are now connected and free to try and increase the blast on white's king. So we see here in this position, knight b6 keeping a knight out of c4, which might have been quite annoying. You could imagine knight c4, f5 and bishop f4, and white's pieces will coordinate on d6. So we see knight c4 now from white anyway, and black looks better after taking, and what Magnus played was f5 here, which looks logical, trying to weaken white's king a little bit more. E takes, now g5. Bishop f7, black stands technically better here, and this d5 liberating break looks very powerful. Queen c2 doesn't look the most accurate move, but I think white's position is very difficult anyway. So queen f2 waiting just for d5, it's very, very powerful central liberation. Putting a bishop right across white's king here, menacingly, setting up all sorts of horrific tactics. Bishop g5, Houdini loves this move, bishop takes g5. Okay, the queen's actually now unfortunately placed on queen g3. So just to show, knight g5, there was the rook h1 again, absolutely. Fg5, was bishop f3 strongest? Yes. Okay, no need for too many explanations there. So queen g3 looks like a sensible move, but now fg of course is ruled out, so that's pinned the f pawn, which means g5 coming back again is now really powerful. Fg is not possible here. So knight takes g5 was played, and it is a clever trick to kind of make sure that black rooks are not coordinating on g8. And you might think, well, what about if black had played bishop takes g2, queen takes g2, gets rid of the pin, so that bishop g5 there'll be fg at least, but still it's bad for white. Rook h4, okay, it's not pleasant, but and it's probably absolutely losing as well, but slightly better than the game. Okay, so that's a clever idea to play. The idea to play bishop takes g5 to make queen takes g5 possible, because clearly fg is not possible. So now queen takes g5 is possible without getting skewered immediately. The threat of skewering now forces king f2. What else is there? It looks very difficult. So now check, that's a powerful move. Rook d8, simply creating lots and lots of threats like queen c4 and rook g8. It's all over really. So white plays queen g3, check, and after rook takes b2, white resigned. A bit of a crushing defeat, but as I say, I don't know how seriously they took the Amber Blindfold. Maybe they did take it very seriously. Maybe it was part of the main event by the Dutch billionaire Oostrom, who was setting these up for a number of years, both the Blindfold and the Rapid, to test the world's top grandmasters in these different, unusual, and maybe you could call them spectator, interesting formats. I guess I've steered away from such games because I obviously they're not going to be tactically at full strength. But even so, we've seen tactics in this game which are quite astonishing considering the circumstances of being blindfold chess, in my view. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.